The monitors flatlined at 2:47 a.m., and the woman everyone called the shaking nurse was the only one who didn't flinch. Maya Chen stood in Trauma Bay 3 of Pacific Coast Medical Center, her trembling hands wrapped around a cup of cold coffee she hadn't touched in 2 hours. The San Diego night pressed against the windows like something waiting to get in. Around her, the emergency department hummed with its usual symphony of misery monitor alarms, gurney wheels squeaking against linoleum, the distant wail of an approaching ambulance. But Maya heard something else beneath it all, a frequency most people couldn't detect, the sound of something wrong about to happen. "Chen, coffee run, now." Dr. Harrison Webb didn't look up from his phone as he issued the order. He stood at the nurse's station in his pristine white coat, the one he had dry cleaned twice a week, scrolling through what Maya knew was his Instagram feed. His profile picture showed him shaking hands with a wounded Marine at a VA fundraiser, a photo op that had lasted exactly 90 seconds before Webb complained about the parking and left. Maya set down her cup. "I'm assigned to Trauma Bay 3 tonight. And now you're assigned to getting me an oat milk latte from the cafeteria." Webb finally looked up, his eyes scanning her the way they always did, like he was counting the ways she didn't belong. "Unless you think monitoring empty beds requires your full attention." The tremor in Maya's left hand intensified. She pressed it against her thigh, feeling the ridge of scar tissue that ran from her wrist to her elbow shrapnel, from a helicopter that had tried very hard to kill her 3 years ago in a Syrian valley whose name was still classified. "The cafeteria's closed, Dr. Webb." "Then find one that's open." He turned back to his phone. "And pick up the pace. You walk like you're underwater." She walked like someone whose left leg contained 3 titanium pins and a metal plate that ached when the barometric pressure dropped. She walked like someone who had carried a 200-pound SEAL operator 400 meters through enemy fire while her femoral artery leaked into her boot. But Harrison Webb would never know that, because Harrison Webb had never asked, and Maya Chen had learned a long time ago that some people weren't worth the words. She was halfway to the elevator when she heard it. "Incoming trauma. ETA 2 minutes. GSW. Multiple stab wounds. Male. Approximately 35, unresponsive at scene." The voice belonged to charge nurse Patricia Okafor, a woman built like a linebacker who ran the night shift with an iron fist and a surprisingly gentle heart. She was already pulling on gloves as she spoke, her eyes finding Maya across the department. "Chen, Trauma 1. Move." Maya moved. Her legs screamed, her hands shook, but her feet knew the path to Trauma Bay one the way they knew the path to a foxhole under fire, and she was through the doors before the echo of Patricia's voice had faded. The bay was a controlled chaos of preparation. Nurses Rachel Torres and David Kim were already positioning equipment IV stands, the crash cart, surgical trays that gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights. The air smelled of antiseptic and floor wax. Underneath it, the faint copper promise of blood yet to be spilled. "What do we know?" Maya asked, pulling on gloves. "John Doe," David said without looking up. He was young, 2 years out of nursing school, still bright-eyed enough to believe the hospital was a place of healing rather than a machine that processed human suffering. "Warehouse district. Some kind of fight. Cops are being cagey about details." Maya's hand stilled for half a second. Warehouse district, John Doe, cops being cagey. The words assembled themselves into a pattern she recognized. A pattern that belonged to a world she had left behind, or thought she had. The doors burst open, and the gurney came through like a battering ram. 2 paramedics, sweat-soaked and grim, flanked a body that was more blood than man. Maya's eyes performed the assessment in the time it took her heart to beat twice male, mid-30s. Tactical physique beneath the gore, multiple stab wounds to the anterior torso, defensive wounds on forearms, hypertensive based on the pallor, tachycardic based on the carotid pulse. She could see hammering in his neck, but it was his eyes that stopped her. They were open, conscious, and they were looking directly at her with an expression she had seen 100 times in a dozen different hellholes around the world. Recognition. Chen. Patricia's voice cut through. Vitals. Maya's hands moved automatically, attaching leads, checking lines, performing the dance of emergency medicine she had learned long before she ever set foot in a civilian hospital. BP 70/40, heart rate 140, respiratory rate 28, and climbing. The numbers told a story of a body in extremis, a system beginning to fail. Pressure's tanking, she said. He's going to need whatever I say he needs. Dr. Harrison Webb swept into Trauma Bay, one like he was entering a stage. His white coat billowed behind him, and his face wore the expression of a man who had been interrupted from something important to deal with, something tedious. He pulled on gloves with theatrical precision, not bothering to look at the patient until he was fully costumed for his role. What do we have? Multiple stab wounds, Patricia began. Unresponsive at scene, regained consciousness in transport. I can see that. Webb leaned over the patient, his cologne cutting through the smell of blood. Hemorrhagic shock from penetrating trauma. Obvious. He snapped his fingers at David. Type and cross for 4 units. Start a massive transfusion protocol. Torres, get me a surgical consult. We're going to need to open him up. Maya's eyes were on the patient's chest, watching the rise and fall of his breathing, counting the rhythm, noting the asymmetry that was beginning to develop on the left side. Dr. Webb, she said, his breath sounds are not your concern. Webb didn't look at her. Do what nurses do, Chen. Hold things and hand me things. The patient's hand moved, weak, trembling, but purposeful. His fingers found Maya's wrist and squeezed with strength that shouldn't have been possible, given his blood loss. His lips moved, forming a single word that only she was close enough to hear. Phoenix. Maya's blood turned to ice. The name hit her like a blast wave. Phoenix, a call sign she hadn't heard spoken aloud in 3 years. A name that belonged to a woman who had died in a Syrian valley alongside the helicopter that crashed around her, or at least, that's what she had told herself every night since. The patient's eyes held hers, desperate, knowing. He recognized her, which meant he was one of them, which meant this wasn't a random assault in a warehouse district. This was an operation gone wrong, and somehow, impossibly, it had washed up on the shores of her carefully constructed civilian life. Chen! Webb's voice cracked like a whip. Are you deaf or just stupid? I said, get me the ultrasound. Maya released the patient's hand gently, her face betraying nothing. She had learned that skill in places where a flicker of expression could get you killed. Yes, doctor. She retrieved the ultrasound machine, her mind racing through scenarios, while her body performed the mechanical tasks of a trauma nurse. The patient, whoever he was, knew her call sign, which meant he was special operations, probably SEAL given the San Diego location, which meant someone had blown his cover, which meant whoever had put those stab wounds in him was still out there, and they would be coming to finish the job. Ultrasound's ready, she said, positioning the machine beside Webb. He grabbed the probe without acknowledgement, pressing it against the patient's abdomen with the confidence of a man who had never been wrong about anything in his life. Maya watched the screen over his shoulder, watching the black and white shadows that told the story of what was happening inside this man's body. Free fluid in the abdomen, Webb announced. Significant. He's bleeding internally from the stab wounds. We need to get him to the OR immediately. Dr. Webb. Maya kept her voice level, flat, the way she had learned to speak to officers who outranked her but were about to make a fatal mistake. Can you check the left thorax? Webb's head turned slowly, the way a snake's might before it strikes. Excuse me? His breath sounds are diminished on the left side. His trachea is starting to deviate. I think he might have a... You think? Webb's laugh was sharp enough to cut glass. You think? Chen, you're a night shift nurse who can barely hold a coffee cup without spilling it. You don't think. You don't diagnose. You follow orders and change bedpans and try not to kill anyone with your incompetence. The room had gone quiet. Rachel and David had frozen at their stations, eyes carefully averted. Patricia stood by the door, her jaw tight, her hands clenched at her sides. They had all seen this before, Webb's surgical strikes against anyone who dared question his judgment, but knowing it was coming didn't make it easier to watch. Maya absorbed the words the way she had absorbed shrapnel. They hit. They hurt. They embedded themselves in places that would ache later, but they didn't stop her from functioning. "His oxygen saturation is dropping," she said quietly. 89% and falling, because he's lost half his blood volume. Webb turned back to the patient, dismissing her. "Torres, call the OR. Tell them we're coming up. Kim, push another unit of ONEG." 86%, Maya said. "I heard you the first time." 83. The monitor alarm began to scream. The patient's body arched on the gurney, his chest heaving as his lungs fought for air that couldn't reach them. His eyes found Maya again, wide with the primal terror of suffocation, and in them she saw every soldier she had ever lost, every body she had failed to save, every nightmare that waited for her when she closed her eyes. "He's crashing," David shouted. Webb stood frozen for half a second too long before snapping into motion. "Get me a chest tube tray. He's got a hemothorax." But Maya was already moving. Her shaking hands found the 14-gauge needle she had palmed 3 minutes ago, when she first noticed the asymmetry in his breathing. Her body remembered the motion 117 times she had performed this procedure in conditions far worse than a well-lit trauma bay. And her hands, her treacherous, trembling hands, went absolutely still. She found the second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line, the sweet spot that every combat medic knew by heart. "Chen, what the hell are you?" The needle punched through. The hiss of escaping air was the most beautiful sound in the world, the sound of a tension pneumothorax decompressing, the sound of a collapsed lung reinflating, the sound of a life being pulled back from the edge of the cliff. The patient gasped. His oxygen saturation began to climb. 85, 88, 91. The room was silent, except for the steady beep of the monitor and the sound of Harrison Webb's breathing, heavy and harsh through his nose. "What?" he said slowly. "Do you think you just did?" Maya withdrew the needle, her hands beginning to shake again now that the crisis had passed. Needle decompression. He had a tension pneumothorax from a penetrating wound under his left arm. The pressure was collapsing his lung and compressing his heart. "You performed an invasive procedure without physician authorization." Webb's face had gone the color of old brick. "You could have killed him. You could have punctured his heart, his lung. His lung was already punctured." Maya met his eyes, and for just a moment, the mask slipped. For just a moment, she wasn't a trembling night nurse with a coffee addiction and a mysterious past. She was Lieutenant Commander Maya Chen, and she had seen more death before her 30th birthday than Harrison Webb would see in his entire comfortable life. That's what a pneumothorax is. Webb stepped closer, using his height to loom over her the way he always did when he wanted to intimidate. His cologne filled her nostrils, expensive and cloying, nothing like the smell of blood and dust and burning fuel that still haunted her dreams. "You're done," he said softly. "Do you understand me? When this shift is over, you're finished. I will personally ensure that you never work in medicine again. You will be lucky to get a job emptying trash cans in a clinic." Maya said nothing. There was nothing to say. She had saved the patient's life, and in doing so, she had ended her career. It was a trade she would make again without hesitation. "Dr. Webb." Patricia's voice cut through the tension. "The patient's pressure is still dropping. 80/50. Webb turned away from Maya, his anger momentarily redirected toward the problem at hand. "The abdominal bleeding. We need to get him to the OR now." But Maya was watching the monitor, watching the rhythm of the patient's heart, watching the way his neck veins were beginning to distend even as his blood pressure continued to fall. Beck's triad. Hypotension, distended neck veins, muffled heart sounds. "It's not just the abdomen," she said. "Chen, I swear to God, he's got cardiac tamponade." The words came out flat, clinical, certain. "Blood is filling the pericardial sac. His heart can't pump effectively. He needs a pericardiocentesis right now, or he'll be dead in 3 minutes." Webb stared at her. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then the patient's heart rhythm began to change on the monitor, the steady beeps becoming irregular, chaotic. "He's going into PEA," David said, his voice cracking. "VFib. He's coding." Webb grabbed the defibrillator paddles, his hands moving on autopilot. "Charge to 200. Everyone clear." "Defibrillation won't work," Maya said. "His heart can't fill with blood. You need to drain the pericardium." "I am the doctor." Webb's voice had gone deadly quiet. "You are the nurse. You will step back and let me do my job, or I will have security remove you from this hospital." The monitor screamed its flatline warning. Maya stepped back. The defibrillator whined as it charged. Webb pressed the paddles to the patient's chest, his face a mask of concentration that Maya recognized as panic, wearing a costume. "Clear." The body jerked. The monitor showed a brief spike, then returned to its chaotic rhythm. Again. "Charge to 300. "It won't work," Maya said, but her voice was quiet now, almost to herself. She had stepped back as ordered. She had yielded to the chain of command, the hierarchy that said a doctor's word was law and a nurse's job was to follow. It was the same hierarchy that had gotten soldiers killed in Afghanistan, the same blind obedience to rank that she had spent 14 years learning to navigate. Clear. Another jerk. Another flatline. "Epinephrine," Webb barked. "Push 1 milligram." David's hands shook as he administered the drug. Rachel was crying silently, tears streaming down her face as she watched the man on the table die by inches. Patricia stood with her arms crossed, her expression unreadable, but her eyes kept flicking to Maya with something that might have been a question. The patient's hand moved. It was weak, barely a twitch, but Maya saw it. His fingers were reaching for something at his neck, something hidden beneath the blood-soaked collar of his shirt. She moved without thinking, her hand finding his, and felt him press something into her palm. Cold metal. A familiar weight. Dog tacks. She looked down at them, hidden from Webb's view by the angle of her body. The name stamped into the metal confirmed what she had already known. Morrison. Kyle J. Latuzn. SEAL Team 3. Raven. She remembered him now. A young operator she had worked on once in Yemen. A bullet wound to the shoulder that had nicked his subclavian artery. She had kept him alive for 47 minutes in the back of a Humvee while they raced toward the extraction point. He had called her an angel. She had told him angels didn't exist in places like that. His eyes found hers. His lips moved, forming words that no one else could hear. "They're coming. Get out." Then his eyes rolled back, and the monitor screamed its continuous tone. "Time of death," Webb said, stepping back from the table. His voice was steady, professional, already composing the narrative he would tell. 3:17 a.m. Cause of death. Hemorrhagic shock secondary to multiple penetrating trauma wounds. Chen. Note that the patient was unresponsive to all resuscitation attempts. Maya's hands had stopped shaking. That was the thing about her tremors, the thing that no one at Pacific Coast Medical Center understood. Her hands shook when she was at rest, when she was carrying coffee, when she was performing the mundane tasks of civilian life. But in the moments when it mattered, when lives hung in the balance, and seconds meant the difference between survival and death, her hands became absolutely still. The same adrenaline that made most people fumble had the opposite effect on her damaged nervous system. Combat had rewired her brain in ways the VA doctors still didn't fully understand. She reached for the long needle on the procedure tray. "Chen." Patricia's voice was sharp with warning. "Don't. If I'm going to be fired anyway," Maya said quietly, "I might as well earn it." She pushed Webb aside. Not gently, there was no time for gentle, but with the controlled force of someone who had spent years learning exactly how much pressure it took to move an obstacle. Webb stumbled, his mouth opening in outrage, but Maya was already positioning herself over the patient's chest. Subxiphoid approach. 45-degree angle. Aim for the left shoulder. She had done this 17 times in her career. 12 of those patients had survived. Those weren't great odds in a civilian hospital, but in a combat zone, they were miraculous. The needle slid beneath the sternum. She felt the resistance of the pericardium, then the give, as she punctured through. Dark blood, venous blood, not the bright arterial red of a cardiac puncture, began to fill the syringe. "You're killing him," Webb shouted. "Security! Someone call security!" Maya kept aspirating. 20 milliliters. 40. 60. The blood that was strangling the patient's heart, preventing it from beating, flowing into the syringe 1 milliliter at a time. The monitor changed. The flat line became a spike. Then another. Then a rhythm weak, thready, but present. "Sinus tachycardia," David whispered. "Oh my God, he's got a rhythm." Maya withdrew the needle carefully, her hand still rock steady. The patient's eyes fluttered. His chest rose with a breath that was entirely his own. "Blood pressure 75/50, Rachel said, her voice trembling. "It's low, but it's there. He's alive." The room went silent. Maya stepped back from the table, and as she did, her hands began to shake again. The tremor returned like an old friend, reminding her of everything she had lost, everything she had survived, everything she carried with her, every moment of every day. "Get him to the OR," she said quietly. "He's still got internal bleeding. He needs surgery." Webb stood frozen, his face cycling through emotions too fast to track rage, disbelief, something that might have been fear. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "You just ended your career." "Maybe." Maya pulled off her gloves, dropping them in the biohazard bin. "But he's alive to file the complaint." She walked out of Trauma Bay 1 without looking back. The break room was empty at 3:30 inches the morning. Maya sat in the plastic chair by the window, watching the lights of San Diego sparkle against the black velvet of the Pacific Ocean. Her hands trembled around a cup of coffee she still hadn't touched. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind the familiar ache of exhaustion and the cold knowledge that her life was about to change. Kyle Morrison was alive. Raven was alive. But he had recognized her, which meant others might too. And his warning echoed in her mind like the distant thump of rotor blades. "They're coming. Get out." Who was coming? The people who had stabbed him, or something worse. She should leave. She should walk out of this hospital right now, get in her car, and drive until the Pacific coast was nothing but a memory. She had done it before the clean break, the new identity, the careful construction of a life that looked nothing like the one she had left behind. She could do it again, but she was tired of running, tired of being the ghost, the shadow, the woman who disappeared when things got complicated. She had spent 3 years building something here, not a life, exactly, but the scaffolding of one, a job, an apartment, a routine that almost felt like peace. The door opened behind her. Maya. Patricia Okafor stood in the doorway, her face unreadable. She was holding something in her hand, a manila folder, thick with papers. "Webb is on the phone with the board chairman," Patricia said. "His father. They're drafting your termination letter right now." "I figured." Patricia walked into the room, letting the door swing shut behind her. She sat in the chair across from Maya, placing the folder on the table between them. "I've been a nurse for 32 years, she said slowly. "I've seen a lot of doctors, good ones, bad ones, ones who shouldn't be allowed to operate a stethoscope. But I've never seen anyone do what you just did in that trauma bay." Maya said nothing. "Needle decompression for a tension pneumothorax. Emergency pericardiocentesis for cardiac tamponade. Both procedures performed perfectly, without hesitation, under pressure that would have broken most physicians." Patricia's eyes were steady on Maya's face. "That's not nursing school training. That's not even standard medical school training. That's combat medicine." The silence stretched between them. "Who are you, Maya Chen?" Before Maya could answer, before she could decide whether to lie or deflect, or simply walk away, a sound cut through the quiet of the break room. Rotor blades. Heavy. Getting closer. Maya's head turned toward the window. In the distance, against the star-scattered sky, she could see lights approaching. Not the single light of a civilian helicopter, not the familiar silhouette of a medevac bird. 2 aircraft. flying in formation, moving fast, military. What the hell? Patricia stood, moving toward the window. Maya was already on her feet. The coffee cup fell from her hands, shattering against the floor, but she didn't notice. Her eyes were fixed on those approaching lights, her mind calculating distance and speed and time. They're coming, but not the wolves Kyle had warned her about. These were the shepherds. The helicopters came in low and fast, their rotor wash bending the palm trees in the hospital parking lot like supplicants bowing before a king. Maya watched from the break room window as the two MH-60 Blackhawks. She recognized the silhouette the way most people recognize the shape of their childhood home, flared, and touched down on the helipad that was normally reserved for civilian medevac flights. Before the skids had fully settled, doors were sliding open and men were pouring out. Not paramedics, not hospital staff, operators. She could see it in the way they moved, the fluid economy of motion that came from years of training and combat deployment. They wore civilian clothes, jeans, tactical jackets, boots that had seen desert sand, but they carried themselves like weapons. Maya. Patricia's voice was tight. What is happening? The break room door slammed open. Two men entered first, scanning the room with eyes that missed nothing. Behind them came a face Maya hadn't seen in 3 years, a face that belonged to a different life, a different world, a different version of herself. Master Chief Vincent Dominguez looked older than she remembered, more gray at his temples, more lines around his eyes, but he still moved like a panther, still carried himself with the quiet authority of a man who had walked through hell so many times that he'd started leaving footprints there. His eyes found her, and something shifted in his expression. Relief, recognition, and underneath it all, the desperate urgency of a man running out of time. Phoenix. The word hit the room like a thunderclap. Patricia's head snapped toward Maya, her eyes wide. The two operators flanking Dominguez exchanged glances that contained entire conversations. Maya stood perfectly still. Viper. Dominguez crossed the room in 3 strides and dropped to one knee in front of her. It wasn't a gesture of submission, it was respect. The kind that couldn't be faked or demanded, but only earned through years of shared sacrifice. Thank God, he said. Phoenix, we need you. Raven's dying and the wolves are coming. Raven's in surgery. Maya's voice was flat, controlled, betraying nothing of the storm building inside her. I stabilized him 20 minutes ago. Cardiac tamponade and tension pneumothorax. Dominguez's eyes flickered with something that might have been awe. You saved him. Of course you did. He rose to his feet. But it's not enough. The people who did this to him, they know he's here. They're coming to finish the job, and they won't care who gets in the way. Who are they? Private military contractors. 8-man team, former special operations, well-equipped and highly motivated. Dominguez's jaw tightened. Raven was undercover, investigating a weapons trafficking ring that's been moving military hardware through the port. He got too close, and someone decided to cut their losses. Maya processed the information the way she had processed 1,000 tactical briefings quickly, efficiently, sorting relevant data from noise. How long until they get here? Our intel says 30 minutes. Maybe less. And you came here instead of calling the police because the police can't stop these people. Because Raven has information in his head that's worth more than this entire hospital. And because Dominguez's voice softened. Because when everything goes sideways, there's only one person I trust to get us through it. There's only one Phoenix. Patricia stepped forward, her face a mask of confusion and dawning realization. Will someone please tell me what the hell is going on? Who are you people? And who she turned to Maya. Who are you? Maya looked at the woman who had been her supervisor for 3 years, the woman who had covered for her when the tremors were bad, who had advocated for her when Webb complained, who had treated her with kindness in a profession that often forgot kindness existed. My name is Maya Chen, she said quietly. But for 14 years, I was Lieutenant Commander Chen, Naval Special Warfare Development Group, Medical Support, call sign Phoenix. She paused. I was a combat medic. I went where the hardest cases were. I saved the ones who weren't supposed to survive. Patricia's mouth opened, but no words came out. 3 years ago, my helicopter was hit by an RPG during a hot extraction in Syria. I kept operating on a wounded SEAL while the bird spiraled down. We crashed. I survived. Barely. Maya held up her trembling hands. The blast gave me a traumatic brain injury. My hands shake now. The Navy said I couldn't operate anymore, so I came here. I tried to be normal. I tried to forget. But you can't forget who you are, Dominguez said. Believe me, I've tried. The sound of hurried footsteps echoed in the hallway outside. A moment later, the door burst open again, and Dr. Harrison Webb stormed in, flanked by 2 hospital security guards who looked deeply uncertain about their life choices. There you are. Webb's face was flushed with triumph. Security, escort Miss Chen off the premises immediately. She is terminated, effective now, and if she resists, he stopped. His eyes had finally registered the other occupants of the room. The 2 armed operators, the Master Chief, with his weathered face and dangerous calm, the entire tableau that didn't fit into his understanding of how hospitals worked. Who the hell are you people? Dominguez didn't look at him. Dr. Webb, I presume. Chief of Emergency Medicine, Stanford Medical, father on the board, never served a day in his life, but wears a veteran charity pin for the photo ops. Webb's face went pale. How do you... I know everything about everyone in this hospital, Doctor. It's my job. Dominguez finally turned to face him, and something in his expression made Webb take an involuntary step backward. Right now, there's a team of heavily armed mercenaries heading toward this building. They're coming to kill the patient in your OR, the one this woman saved after you nearly let him die, and they won't hesitate to eliminate anyone who gets in their way. That's ridiculous. This is a hospital. We have security. Your security consists of 4 guards armed with pepper spray and good intentions. The people coming have automatic weapons and no conscience. Dominguez's voice was cold. You have 2 choices. You can help us lock down this facility and protect your patients, or you can stand there and argue while people die. Choose now. Webb's mouth worked soundlessly. The security guards behind him looked at each other, then at the operators, then very quietly put their hands nowhere near their pepper spray. I'm calling the police, Webb finally managed. Already done. They're setting up a perimeter, but they won't be here in time to stop the initial assault. Dominguez turned back to Maya. Phoenix, I need you. Not just your medical skills, I need you to run tactical coordination. You know this hospital. You know where the choke points are, where we can funnel them, where we can protect the most people. Maya's trembling hands clenched into fists. For 3 years, she had tried to bury this part of herself. For 3 years, she had pretended that Phoenix was dead, that the woman who had walked through fire and come out the other side had simply ceased to exist. But standing here now, with the wolves at the door and innocent lives hanging in the balance, she felt that woman stirring inside her like a soldier waking from a long sleep. How many operators did you bring? 6, including me, plus Raven. If we can get him conscious, that's not enough for a standard defensive posture, not against 8 trained contractors. Maya's mind was already working, already calculating angles and distances and probabilities. We need to change the math. Force them into kill zones. Use the hospital infrastructure against them. That's why I need you. Dominguez's voice was soft. You always saw the angles no one else did. Maya closed her eyes. She thought about the patients in this hospital. The elderly woman in room 312, recovering from hip surgery. The teenager in the ICU who had been in a car accident. The newborns in the maternity ward who had never known a world at war. She thought about the nurses and doctors and techs who had come to work tonight, expecting the usual grind of blood and pain and small victories, not a military assault. She thought about running, about walking out the back door and disappearing into the San Diego night, leaving this mess for someone else to clean up. Then she thought about Kyle Morrison, Raven, lying on that gurney with his life leaking out of him, finding her eyes and saying her name like it was a prayer. Phoenix. She opened her eyes. Patricia, I need you to initiate a lockdown. All patients move to interior rooms, away from windows. Staff to shelter in place unless they have critical duties. Kill the exterior lights, make them fight in the dark. Patricia stared at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, she nodded. I'll handle it. Webb. Maya turned to the man who had spent 3 years making her life miserable. Your patient is in surgery right now. The OR is on the 3rd floor, East Wing. That's where they'll be heading. I need you to coordinate with the surgical team, keep them informed, keep them calm, and for God's sake, keep them working. Raven needs to survive this. Webb's face was a battlefield of emotions, fear, anger, wounded pride. You can't give me orders. You're just She's a decorated combat veteran who saved more lives than you've ever seen, Doctor. Dominguez's voice cut like a blade, and right now, she's the only thing standing between your hospital and a massacre. So I suggest you shut up and do what she says. Webb's mouth snapped shut. Maya turned to the window. In the distance, she could see headlights approaching on the access road, a convoy of vehicles moving fast, running without lights except for the brief flicker of high beams. The wolves were here. Viper, she said quietly. Get your men in position. We've got about 5 minutes. Dominguez nodded once, then turned and strode out of the room, his operators falling in behind him. The break room emptied, leaving Maya alone with the approaching thunder of engines and the weight of 47 lives resting on her shoulders. Her hands were shaking, but her mind was clear. The hospital transformed in the space of 4 minutes. Lights died in sequence, plunging corridors into emergency-lit gloom. The PA system crackled with Patricia's voice, calm and authoritative, directing staff to secure patients and shelter in place. Somewhere in the distance, Maya could hear the wail of approaching police sirens, still too far away to matter. She stood in the main lobby, watching through the glass doors as the convoy pulled into the parking lot. 3 black SUVs, windows tinted, moving with the coordinated precision of a military operation. They parked in a triangular formation near the ER entrance, and for a long moment, nothing happened. Then the doors opened, and the wolves emerged. 8 men, tactical gear beneath civilian jackets. Weapons concealed, but Maya could see the telltale bulges, the way they held their arms slightly away from their bodies. They moved like operators, scanning their surroundings with eyes that had been trained to identify threats and eliminate them. The leader was a big man, broad-shouldered and thick-necked, with the flat affect of someone who had long ago stopped seeing other human beings as people. He said something to his team, and they split into 2 groups, 4 heading toward the main entrance, 4 peeling off toward the side. They're flanking, Maya said into the radio Dominguez had given her. 4 coming through the front, 4 through the east service entrance. Copy. Dominguez's voice was steady in her ear. We've got the east covered. Can you slow down the front group? Maya looked around the lobby. Emergency lighting cast everything in shades of red and shadow. The reception desk, the waiting area with its bolted-down chairs, the supply closet where they kept the mops and cleaning chemicals. I can do better than slow them down. She moved quickly, her legs screaming in protest, her hands steady for the first time all night. The supply closet yielded what she needed: industrial floor cleaner, the kind that turned linoleum into an ice rink when applied liberally. She spread it across the tile floor in front of the main entrance, then positioned herself behind the reception desk with a fire extinguisher in her hands. The front doors exploded inward. The first 2 men came through fast, weapons up, sweeping the room with professional efficiency. The 3rd man hit the floor cleaner at a full sprint. His feet went out from under him, and he crashed into his teammate with a sound like bowling pins scattering. Maya rose from behind the desk and discharged the fire extinguisher directly into the face of the 4th man. White chemical foam filled his eyes and mouth, and he stumbled backward, clawing at his face, his weapon discharging harmlessly into the ceiling. She didn't wait to see the results. She was already moving, ducking through the door behind the reception desk, sprinting down the corridor toward the stairwell. Behind her, she heard shouting, cursing, the sound of men trying to regain their footing on a surface that had become a skating rink. "Front group delayed," she said into the radio. "Maybe 60 seconds before they recover. Good work. East group is engaged." The sound of gunfire crackled through the radio, distant and muffled. "We're pushing them back toward the loading dock." Maya climbed the stairs 2 at a time, her leg burning with every step. The ore was on the 3rd floor, and that's where the mercenaries would eventually head. Raven was the target. Everything else was just obstacles to be eliminated. She emerged onto the 3rd floor to find chaos. Nurses and orderlies were huddled in doorways, their faces pale with fear. A security guard lay unconscious near the elevator, a bruise already forming on his temple, and at the end of the hallway, 2 men in tactical gear were approaching the ore doors. They had gotten past Dominguez's team. They had found another way up. Maya's mind processed the situation in fractions of a second. 2 hostiles, both armed, approximately 40 feet away. She had no weapon, no backup, and a body that had been broken and rebuilt with titanium and scar tissue. The smart move was to retreat, to radio for help, to let the professionals handle it. But the professionals were 3 floors down, and Raven was behind those doors. She grabbed a crash cart from the wall and shoved it down the hallway with all her strength. The cart hit the first mercenary in the back of the knees. He went down hard, his weapon skittering across the floor. His partner spun, raising his rifle, but Maya was already closing the distance. She had spent 14 years learning how to fight in close quarters, how to turn an enemy's size and strength against them, how to survive when the odds were impossible. The mercenary was bigger than her by 80 pounds. He was faster, stronger, better armed, but he made the mistake that everyone made when they looked at Maya Chen. He saw a small woman with shaking hands and assumed she was prey. She ducked under his rifle, getting inside his guard, where the weapon was useless. Her elbow found his solar plexus, driving the air from his lungs. As he doubled over, she grabbed the back of his head and drove his face into her rising knee. Cartilage crunched, blood sprayed. He dropped like a marionette with cut strings. The first mercenary was getting to his feet, reaching for his sidearm. Maya scooped up his fallen rifle and put 2 rounds into the ceiling above his head. "Don't." He froze, hands behind your head. "On your knees." He complied, his eyes never leaving her face. There was something new in his expression now, not fear, exactly, but reassessment. He was looking at her the way you look at a snake you've just realized is venomous. "Who are you?" he asked. "I'm a nurse." Maya's voice was flat. "I change bedpans." She zip-tied his hands with the restraints she'd taken from the crash cart, then did the same to his unconscious partner. By the time she was finished, her hands were shaking again, the adrenaline beginning to fade. The OR doors opened, and a surgeon in blood-spattered scrubs stumbled out. His eyes went wide at the scene in the hallway, the unconscious mercenaries, the woman with the rifle, the impossible reality of violence in his sterile domain. What's happening?" "How's the patient?" He's stable. We repaired the internal bleeding, but..." "Good. Keep working. Stay away from the windows. Help is coming." Maya moved past him, stepping over the bodies of the men she had neutralized. The radio crackled in her ear. "Phoenix. Status, 3rd floor secure. 2 hostiles down. Raven is safe. Copy. We've got 4 more contained on the ground floor, but we're missing 2. Maya's blood went cold. 8 men in the team, 4 engaged by Dominguez, 2 neutralized on the 3rd floor. That left 2 unaccounted for. Where were they? The answer came in the form of a scream from somewhere below. Not a scream of pain, a scream of terror. A woman's voice, high and desperate. "They're in the ER," Patricia's voice cut through the radio. 2 of them. They've got hostages. Maya was already running. The stairwell blurred past her. Her leg was a symphony of agony, but she had learned long ago to treat pain as information rather than an obstacle. The ER was on the ground floor, east wing, 30 seconds if she pushed hard. She burst through the stairwell door to find a nightmare. The ER waiting room had become a hostage situation. 2 mercenaries stood in the center of the room, weapons drawn. Around them, huddled on the floor, were a dozen civilians, patients, family members, a mother clutching a crying infant. One of the mercenaries had his arm around the throat of a young nurse Maya recognized. Emily, 23 years old, just finished her orientation last month, and standing in the doorway, his face a mask of cold fury, was Dr. Harrison Webb. "Let her go," Webb was saying. "She's not part of this. None of these people are part of this." "Then tell us where the seal is," the mercenary replied. His voice was calm, almost bored. "3rd floor? 4th? We know he's in surgery somewhere. Give us the room number, and we walk away." "I can't. You have 5 seconds." The mercenary pressed his weapon against Emily's temple. "Then I start demonstrating my commitment to this negotiation." Maya stepped into the room. The mercenaries spun toward her, weapons rising. She held her hands up, the rifle she'd taken now slung across her back, making herself as non-threatening as possible. "You don't want to do this," she said quietly. "And who the hell are you?" "I'm the one you're looking for." Maya's voice was steady. "You want the person who saved your target, the one who knows exactly how to keep him alive or let him die. That's me." The mercenary's eyes narrowed. "The nurse, the combat medic." Maya took a step forward. "Naval Special Warfare, 6 deployments, 14 years of putting operators back together after men like you tried to take them apart." Something flickered in the mercenary's expression. Recognition, perhaps, or calculation. "Let the hostages go," Maya continued. "All of them. And I'll take you to your target myself." "Maya, no." Webb's voice was strangled. "You can't." "I can." She didn't look at him. "I'm the only one who can." The mercenary studied her for a long moment. Maya could see the calculations running behind his eyes, the risk assessment, the cost-benefit analysis, the cold mathematics of violence. He was a professional, which meant he understood that dead hostages created complications while living ones created leverage. "You expect me to believe you'll just hand over a fellow operator?" "I expect you to believe that I'll do whatever it takes to keep these people alive." Maya kept her voice flat, emotionless. "That's what I do. That's what I've always done." The mercenary's grip on Emily tightened. The young nurse whimpered, tears streaming down her face. "Here's what's going to happen," the mercenary said. "You're going to drop that rifle. Then, you're going to lead us to the seal. If you try anything clever, I put a bullet in this girl's head. And then we work through the rest of these people until someone more cooperative emerges." Maya unslung the rifle slowly, letting it clatter to the floor. "Fine. But the hostages stay here. You don't need them if you have me. The hostages stay until we confirm the target. Then we'll discuss their release." It wasn't ideal, but it was something. Maya nodded. "3rd floor, East Wing, or number 2. The mercenary gestured to his partner, who moved toward Maya with zip ties. She let him secure her hands behind her back, feeling the plastic bite into her wrists. The position was familiar. She had been captured twice during her career, both times managing to escape before extraction became necessary. Bound hands were an inconvenience, not an obstacle. "Move." The mercenary shoved Emily toward the other hostages and grabbed Maya's arm. "You lead. Any deviation from the route, any attempt to signal for help, and I start shooting." They moved through the darkened corridors of Pacific Coast Medical Center, Maya in front, the 2 mercenaries flanking her. The emergency lighting cast long shadows across the walls, turning familiar hallways into something alien and threatening. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear the continued crackle of gunfire. Dominguez's team, still engaged with the remaining hostiles. She led them to the stairwell, climbing slowly, buying time. Her mind was working through possibilities, calculating angles, searching for the moment when the odds would shift in her favor. "You served," the mercenary behind her said. It wasn't a question. 14 years. "Which unit?" "DevGru. Medical support." A low whistle. "You're Phoenix. The one they talk about." Maya said nothing. I heard stories, the mercenary continued. The medic who could bring back the dead. The one who walked out of that crash in Syria when everyone else burned. His voice held something that might have been respect. Shame you ended up on the wrong side of this. There's no wrong side when innocent people are dying. There's always a wrong side. It's just a matter of who's paying. They reached the 3rd floor. Maya led them down the corridor toward O2, past the unconscious bodies of the mercenaries she had neutralized earlier. The lead hostile paused, looking down at his fallen comrades. You did this? They got in my way. Another flicker of reassessment in his eyes. He was beginning to understand that the trembling nurse he had dismissed was something else entirely, something dangerous. The OR doors loomed ahead. Through the small window, Maya could see the surgical team still working, their backs to the door, focused on the patient who represented the sum total of someone's desperate calculation. Kill the seal. Bury the information. Clean up the loose ends. Open it, the mercenary ordered. Maya's hands were bound behind her. She couldn't reach the door handle. The mercenary realized this and stepped forward, reaching past her to push the door open. That was his mistake. Maya dropped her weight, spinning as she fell. Her bound hands found the knife she had palmed from the crash cart upstairs, a small scalpel, barely 3 inches of blade. But enough. The zip tie parted like paper. She came up inside the mercenary's guard, the scalpel finding the soft tissue of his inner thigh, slicing through the femoral artery with surgical precision. He had maybe 90 seconds before he bled out. She had maybe 2 seconds before his partner reacted. She used one of them to grab the falling mercenary's sidearm. The second mercenary was faster than she expected. His weapon came up, finger tightening on the trigger. Maya fired twice, center mass. The shots echoed through the corridor like thunder, and the man crumpled against the wall, leaving a dark smear as he slid to the floor. The first mercenary was on his knees now, hands pressed against his thigh, blood pumping between his fingers. He looked up at her with eyes that held no fear, only a kind of tired acceptance. Femoral artery, he said. Clean cut. Professional. I told you. Maya kept the weapon trained on him. I'm a combat medic. You could save me. If you wanted, I could. She didn't move. But you threatened to kill a 23-year-old nurse who just finished her orientation. You held a gun to her head and made her cry. It was just business. So is this. She watched him die. It took 73 seconds longer than she'd estimated, which meant he had better cardiovascular fitness than most. When the light finally faded from his eyes, she felt nothing. No satisfaction, no guilt, no triumph. Just the familiar emptiness that came after combat, the hollow space where normal emotions should live. The OR doors burst open, and the surgical team spilled out, their faces masks of terror. It's over, Maya said quietly. You're safe. Keep working on the patient. They stared at her, at the blood on her hands, the weapon in her grip, the bodies at her feet. They looked at her the way people always looked at her after they saw what she could do, like she was something other than human, something to be feared. She was used to it. Phoenix. Dominguez's voice crackled through the radio. Status? 3rd floor secure. All hostiles neutralized. Maya paused. The hostages in the ER, are they safe? We've got them. Police are on scene now. It's over. Maya leaned against the wall, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline was crashing out of her system, leaving behind the accumulated damage of the night. The leg that had carried her up and down stairs it shouldn't have been able to climb, the hands that had performed miracles they shouldn't have been capable of, the mind that had made decisions no civilian should ever have to make. Her hands were shaking again. She slid down the wall until she was sitting on the floor, the weapon resting in her lap, her eyes fixed on nothing. Around her, the hospital slowly came back to life. Voices calling out, footsteps approaching, the wail of sirens growing closer. The crisis was over. The wolves had been stopped. The sheep were safe. But Phoenix felt nothing like a shepherd. She felt like what she had always been, a weapon that had been pointed at a problem and told to solve it. And she had solved it, the only way she knew how. With violence, with death, with the cold efficiency of someone who had long ago learned to turn off the parts of herself that might hesitate. Maya. She looked up. Harrison Webb stood at the end of the corridor, his white coat stained with someone else's blood, his face a landscape of emotions she couldn't begin to parse. "The patient," he said slowly. "Raven. He's out of surgery. He's going to make it. Good." Webb took a step closer, then another. He looked at the bodies on the floor, at the weapon in her hands, at the woman he had spent 3 years dismissing as a liability. "I was wrong about you," he said quietly. "I was wrong about everything." Maya closed her eyes. "Yes, you were. I'm sorry." The words hung in the air between them. Maya had imagined this moment 100 times, the apology, the recognition, the validation she had never received. She had thought it would feel like victory. It felt like nothing. "There were 3 patients," she said, opening her eyes. 3 patients who died because you were negligent. Their families received sealed settlements. Their cases were buried. Webb's face went pale. When the police finish securing this scene, they're going to find evidence on these mercenaries. Communications, financial records, connections to a weapons trafficking ring that's been operating through San Diego for years. Maya's voice was steady, and somewhere in those records, they're going to find your name. The payoffs you received to look the other way when certain patients came through your ER. The documentation you falsified to cover the tracks. How do you? Raven was investigating the trafficking ring. He was gathering evidence on everyone involved, including the hospital administrator who helped them launder their wounded through a legitimate trauma center. Maya stood, her legs trembling but holding. "You're not just guilty of malpractice, Dr. Webb. You're complicit in murder." Webb's mouth opened, but no words came out. The elevator doors at the end of the corridor slid open, and a flood of police officers poured out, led by a detective in a rumpled suit who looked like he hadn't slept in days. "Dr. Harrison Webb?" The detective held up a badge. "You're under arrest. You have the right to remain silent." Maya watched as they handcuffed him, watched as the arrogance drained from his face, replaced by something small and desperate and afraid. Watched as the man who had called her a liability, a diversity hire, a nurse who changed bedpans, was reduced to exactly what he had always been, a coward hiding behind a white coat. "This isn't over," Webb said as they led him past her. "I'll fight this. My father. Your father is being arrested as we speak." The detective's voice was tired. "Seems the whole family was involved. Must be a hell of a Thanksgiving dinner." They took him away. The corridor fell silent. Maya stood alone among the bodies of the men she had killed. And for the first time in 3 years, she let herself feel the weight of who she was. The sun rose over San Diego, like it had forgotten what had happened in the darkness. Golden light spilled across the Pacific, painting the hospital parking lot in shades of amber and rose. The helicopters were gone now, lifted off an hour ago with Dominguez and his team. Police cruisers still clustered around the entrance, their lights spinning lazily, but the urgency had faded. The crisis was over. The paperwork had begun. Maya sat on a bench outside the ER entrance, a cup of coffee growing cold in her trembling hands. She had refused medical attention 3 times, refused sedation twice, refused everything except this a moment of stillness in the aftermath of violence. The automatic doors hissed open behind her. "Mind if I sit?" Patricia Okafor lowered herself onto the bench without waiting for an answer. She looked exhausted, her scrubs stained with the night's work, but her eyes were clear and steady. "Hell of a shift," Patricia said. "I've had worse." "I believe you." Patricia was quiet for a moment, watching a seagull pick through the debris in the parking lot. "The board is meeting in an hour. Emergency session. They're trying to figure out what to do about everything, the attack, the arrests, the fact that their chief of emergency medicine was apparently running a side business in medical fraud and weapons trafficking. Sounds complicated." "It is." Patricia turned to look at her. "They want to offer you a position, Director of Emergency Services. They figure having a decorated combat veteran running the department might help with the PR nightmare." Maya laughed, a short sound with no humor in it. "They want to use me for optics. Just like Webb used that charity pin. Probably. But it's still a real offer. Real authority. A chance to change things. Maya stared at her coffee. The surface rippled with her tremors, small waves in a tiny sea. For 14 years, she had followed orders. She had gone where she was pointed and done what needed to be done and tried not to think too hard about the cost. Then she had tried to escape, to become someone else, to pretend that Phoenix had died in that Syrian valley. But Phoenix hadn't died. Phoenix had just been sleeping. "I'm not a director," Maya said finally. "I'm not an administrator. I'm a medic. I patch holes in people who shouldn't have holes in them." "Then what do you want?" The question hung in the morning air. Maya thought about the operating room upstairs, where Kyle Morrison was recovering from wounds that should have killed him. She thought about Emily, the young nurse who had been held at gunpoint, who was probably at home right now, trying to convince herself that she could ever feel safe again. She thought about the patients who had huddled in their rooms, while violence raged through the corridors, trusting that someone would protect them. "There's a training program," Maya said slowly. "Tactical Combat Casualty Care. It teaches civilian medical personnel how to function in crisis situations, active shooters, terrorist attacks, mass casualty events, how to save lives when everything is falling apart. I've heard of it. The Navy offered me a position as an instructor 2 years ago, when I first got out. I turned it down because I thought I wanted to forget. And now," Maya looked at her hands, still shaking, always shaking. But she remembered the way they had steadied when it mattered, the way her body had remembered what her mind had tried to forget. "Now, I think maybe forgetting isn't the point. Maybe the point is teaching other people what I know, so they don't have to learn it the way I did." She took a breath, so fewer people die while everyone stands around waiting for someone else to act. Patricia nodded slowly. "The board won't like it. They want a hero they can parade around for the cameras. Then they'll have to find another hero." Maya stood, her leg aching, her body screaming for rest she wouldn't allow herself yet. "I'm tired of being a weapon. I want to be a teacher." The doors opened again, and Dominguez stepped out. He had changed into civilian clothes, jeans, a worn navy t-shirt, boots that had seen better decades. He looked like any other veteran trying to find his place in a world that didn't quite fit anymore. "Phoenix. Viper." He stopped beside her, his eyes scanning the parking lot, the way they always would, the way hers always did. Some habits couldn't be unlearned. "Command wants to talk to you," he said. "They're offering reinstatement, full rank, back pay, choice of assignment. After what you did tonight, you could write your own ticket." "I know, but you're not going to take it." It wasn't a question. Dominguez had known her for 8 years. He had seen her at her best and her worst, had watched her pull miracles out of impossible situations, had held her hand when the nightmares got bad enough to make her scream. He knew what she was going to say before she said it. "I'm done putting holes in people," Maya said quietly. "I'm done patching holes in boys who shouldn't have been there in the first place. I want to do something different. I want to do something that matters." Dominguez was silent for a long moment. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out something small and metallic. A challenge coin, DEVGRU, the trident and skull gleaming in the morning light. "You earned this," he said. "Whatever you do next, wherever you go, you earned this." Maya took the coin. It was warm from his pocket, heavy with history and sacrifice and all the things that couldn't be put into words. She closed her fingers around it and felt the edges press into her palm. "Tell Raven I said goodbye," she said. "Tell him Phoenix is still watching." "I will." Dominguez pulled her into a hug, brief, fierce, the embrace of someone who understood that some bonds went deeper than blood. Then he stepped back, nodded once, and walked toward the waiting SUV that would take him back to his world of shadows and secrets. Maya watched him go. The parking lot was filling now with the day shift, nurses and doctors arriving for their regular rotations, most of them unaware of what had happened in the darkness. They walked past her without a second glance, just another tired woman on a bench. just another face in the crowd. They didn't see the scars hidden beneath her sleeves. They didn't see the titanium holding her leg together. They didn't see the years of blood and fire and sacrifice that had forged her into something harder than civilian life could accommodate. But that was okay. They didn't need to see. Maya stood and walked back into the hospital. Not because she had to, but because she chose to. Somewhere upstairs, there were patients who needed care. Somewhere in the city, there were people who would never know how close they had come to losing everything. Somewhere in the future, there were students waiting to learn how to save lives when the world caught fire. Her hands were shaking. They would always shake, but she had learned to work with the tremors, to find stillness in the chaos, to be steady when it mattered most. She was Phoenix. She had risen from the ashes once, and she would keep rising as many times as it took. The elevator doors closed behind her, and Maya Chen went back to work. Outside, the sun continued its climb over San Diego, indifferent to the small dramas of human survival. Seagulls circled the parking lot, searching for scraps. The Pacific Ocean stretched toward the horizon, vast and eternal, keeping its secrets the way it always had. And somewhere in the hospital, a young nurse named Emily was telling a story to her colleagues, a story about the quiet woman with the shaking hands who had walked into a room full of armed men and walked out the only one standing. A story that would spread through the department, then the hospital, then the wider world of medical professionals who understood what it meant to stand between death and the innocent. They called her the shaking nurse, the ghost, the liability. They didn't call her that anymore. Now they called her Phoenix. And when the next crisis came, because there was always a next crisis, they would know exactly who to call. Some people are heroes because they seek glory. Some are heroes because they have no choice. And some are heroes because they understand that the only thing standing between the wolves and the sheep is someone willing to become something else entirely. Someone willing to burn. Someone willing to rise. They say you never really know someone until you see them under pressure. The woman in the scrubs might look ordinary. Her hands might shake. Her voice might be soft. But pressure reveals what comfort conceals. And sometimes the quietest people carry the loudest thunder. If this story hit you, tap like it helps this channel reach more people. What would you have done in Maya's place? Stay hidden or rise up? Drop it in the comments. I read them all. Thanks for watching.